Hi, everyone. Welcome to Disability Inclusive Housing, Creating a Better Future for All. My name is Allie Cannington, and really excited to spend this next few hours with you during this learning lab. I am with the Kelsey, where we accelerate and advocate for disability inclusive housing, for more affordable, accessible, inclusive housing for all. I'm just going to wait for a few minutes to make sure that our captioner is here so that we can ensure full access. So bear with us for just a minute or two, and then we'll get started. Thank you so much.
So this is your new hat now, huh, Allie Cannington?
I think I recognize Randy. Is that your voice?
That is my voice. Is this your new hat? Is this your new hat now?
It is my new hat.
You like it?
I do. Yep. Glad you're here with us, Randy.
Yeah, it's a lot different. This is a lot different job than CFILC. It'll be a whole new bailiwick for you. Are you still going to reach out to the Kara?
Of course.
Okay, because we got a big thing coming up, and I didn't know whether you were going to take part in any of the workshops that we're going to plan on September.
Well, Randy, why don't you and I talk about it offline, and then I'd love to learn more.
Thank you. We'll send you an email.
Awesome. Thanks, Randy.
Thank you. You bet. Bye, Allie.
Bye. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Allie Cannington, and I'm here with the Kelsey, and you have joined one of the final, if not one of the final learning labs for Housing California's amazing Unconference. And you are with us joining in conversation where we're going to be talking about disability inclusive housing, creating a better future for all. So again, we are just waiting on our captioner, and then we will get started. Thank you so much, everyone.
Allie, you're muted.
Can someone let me know if you can see the slide that I'm sharing? All right.
You cannot.
Okay, let me make sure.
You share screen. You got share. There we go. There you go. You got it.
Does it say today's agenda?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thanks, Randy, appreciate it. So first, we are, again, welcome everyone. We have a member of the team today who is access and tech support. You will notice right now that the chat is only available to message to the hosts and co-hosts. We do this to help with accessibility for anyone who may use a screen reader. It can be sometimes overwhelming to have the chat open. So if for any reason you have questions throughout the day, you actually have specific questions about accessibility or tech, please message tech and access support, and we will do our best to make this afternoon as accessible for you. Again, we want to apologize for our captioner is not here. So if you need captioning, please let us know in the chat, and we can do our best to connect you to an app that we recommend to use. Oh, they said they're on their way, 5 minutes. Okay, so with that being said, for anyone else who needs ASL, if you could let us know in the chat, and then we can also let you know the Zoom room where the ASL is happening. So while we wait for the captioner, because we do want to, now that we know that the captioner is 5 minutes away, we're gonna wait to make sure that the space is as accessible as possible. So for the next few minutes, I'd like for you to just get comfy, take a glass of water, a short stretch, and to give you a heads up on what today will look like, we are first going to hear from a panel of leaders with disabilities or disabled leaders who will discuss affordable housing and the unmet need of particularly Californians with disabilities. And you'll notice that I'll use both what we call identity first and person first language throughout today. So that is people with disabilities or disabled people. And people have their different preferences on how they identify. For me, I identify as disabled. Both I have physical disabilities and I also have mental health disabilities. And I come to you as working for the host of our Learning Lab today, the Kelsey. We are an organization that accelerates and advocates for more affordable, accessible, and inclusive housing for people with and without disabilities. We have 240 plus homes in our pipeline and get to do amazing advocacy and policy work alongside partners like Housing California. Then we're gonna go into breakout groups where you're gonna be able to share a little bit about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and what you wanna move towards in action. And then we're gonna hear a second panel. How do we put these ideas of inclusion and equity into practice? And we'll hear from some amazing partners who are doing this work on the ground. And then we'll have a final Q&A and call to action. So again, I wanna thank everyone for making this possible, for Housing California, for putting on an amazing conference, and for all of you for taking the time to spend your Friday afternoon with us. So we will get started as soon as our captioner is here. But for now, we will start. It's available now. Great. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we are actually going to go into our first panel. So, oh, the other thing I'd like to share with folks, if you currently have your camera on, actually a lot of you seem to not have your camera on, which is great. It can be a little distracting when everyone has their cameras on. So if you are a panelist in this first panel, please turn on your camera and we will welcome you. And while you get ready, now that the captioner is here, I want to ground us in why we're here today. So people with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by California's housing crisis. Yet rarely are disabled people at the table co-creating policy and practice solutions. COVID-19 has shed light on the deep wisdom of people with disabilities. For example, people with disabilities who have been organizing online for years. And COVID-19 has laid to bear the broken systems, including in housing, that are harming so many people, particularly Black and Brown people with disabilities. Amidst COVID-19, much of the mainstream has also been called to take action in defense of Black lives and to reckon with a country that since its inception has been enacting state violence against Black people and Black, Indigenous people of color, many of whom have disabilities. So this is the backdrop in which we have this conversation around disability inclusive housing. These issues do not exist in silos. And according to the CDC, there are now over 61 people with disabilities living in the US. That is the largest marginalized population. Disability disproportionately impacts communities of color and LGBTQIA communities and so many more marginalized communities. For majority of our time today, we will be discussing disability from a cross-disability perspective, which means we're going to be talking about disability from more of a broad scope, and that could range from mental health disabilities, physical disabilities, chronic illnesses, intellectual developmental disabilities, the list goes on. And then towards the end of the day, we will hear a little bit more about the specific housing models that are out there for people with disabilities who have higher support needs and who are living in the community, specifically centering folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. People with disabilities are more likely to face housing discrimination, are the highest, the group that has the highest rate of housing discrimination recorded. And then also people with disabilities are more likely to experience homelessness. What I would say is a low estimate of approximately 40% of people experiencing homelessness live with disabilities. People with disabilities have higher rates of living in institutional and congregate settings and are disproportionately experiencing housing insecurity, including unable to afford average rents, as so many folks are struggling with. In fact, according to the Technical Assistance Center, there is no US housing market, of course, including California, in which a person living solely on supplemental security income can afford a safe, decent unit without rental assistance. These issues, again, have only been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. And so as we come into conversation today, I want to connect us back to what Glenn Harris spoke to yesterday from Race Forward. He talked about that we must be centering homes for all, and that many of our ideas related to housing and equity are connected to the fight against ableism, the oppression against people with disabilities. He asked, what does it mean to build housing that works for everyone? And not just that it works, but where people belong. We have to get real about it, as he reminded us, and really think about our conceptions of housing and home. So now is the time where we, people with and without disabilities, must come together to envision and co-create affordable, accessible, and inclusive communities. We're so grateful that you joined us today, and we hope that we can continue throughout our time to reimagine what our communities can be when we center inclusion and equity. So let's get into it. I'm gonna be in conversation with incredible leaders with disabilities for the first part of today. And our first question, and I'm gonna ask each of you, is what does disability inclusive and equitable housing mean to you in your work? So let's start first with Sid Picker from Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, who is a staff attorney. Welcome.
And Allie, this is Michaela for Access. We don't actually have our captioner. We thought they were on, they are not. So we're gonna just pause for 1 minute unless the captioner you are on and we just don't see you here, and please message Tech and Access that you're here.
Thank you, Michaela.
We have a captioner. Here we go.
Okay, so thanks for that introduction, Allie. My name is Sid Pickern, and I'm with Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. And I'm really happy to be here with you all. So I think first and foremost, when we're talking about equitable housing, we're talking about correcting a history of segregation and institutionalization, both in terms of housing opportunities that were historically only available to white folks, and for people with disabilities, having institutionalization as the de facto housing option. So we're really at a point now where we know that these inequities have to be fixed. And I think it's really a matter of elevating accountability in our programs and asking ourselves, how is the work that we do accessible to communities of color and people with disabilities who need affordable, accessible housing? And some of the questions that we can ask ourselves are, how do we bring diversity back to gentrified neighborhoods? How do we increase the number of affordable units in developments? What standard of physical access in a unit would benefit everyone who lives there, regardless of their current need to utilize that feature? How do people with limited transportation options move between spaces? And how do people, for example, with limited English proficiency, even learn about the existing housing opportunities that are available? So these are only some of the questions that we really need to come to terms with. And I also think that the pandemic that we're all experiencing together has really forced many of us to become creative in terms of what housing solutions have conventionally looked like and how that might actually be changing.
Thanks, Sid. And Elizabeth Grigsby, as a rights advocate at the Golden Gate Regional Center, what does disability inclusive and equitable housing mean to you?
Thank you, Allie. I'll just start by saying being a disabled person and living in the Bay Area, we need to look at it this way. We're all getting older. People with disabilities aren't going anywhere. So we need to make apartments and housing accessible for everyone, no matter what your disability is, what your income status is. We need to have everyone at the table to be like, this is what we need, because people aren't in big institutions anymore. People are living in the community, and we're gonna be here. So it would benefit everyone at some time of their life to make housing really accessible and inclusive. You might not be old now, but you will be
Absolutely.
one day. So,
Thanks, Elizabeth. I
thanks,
appreciate it. Keeping it real straight off. I love it. Next, would love to hear from Dolores Tejada, who is the lead organizer at East Bay Housing Organizations, or EBHO. What does disability, inclusive, and equitable housing mean to you in your work?
Yeah, I think coming into working in the affordable housing industry has been a shift for me for sure. And being here now in this space with the recognizing what Sid was talking about the historical barriers, and then also what Liz is talking about with the realization that we all are going to age and we all could theoretically use affordable housing at some point. I think that it looks like recognizing, doing the work now in the industry means that we need to start tackling how we're addressing these issues today with the recognition of history. And it also looks like even more deeply holding the supposed core value that we all hold, which is that housing is a human right. When we include people with disabilities, when we're talking about who are human beings, that means we need to recognize that people with disabilities are whole human beings and also members of our communities. Elizabeth was talking about aging in place and seniors. A lot of affordable housing serves people who are seniors, and seniors have disabilities, are a disabled population. So we also already are doing some of the work, but we need to name it and label it as disability work and move from there.
Thanks, Dolores. And last but certainly not least, Eric Micketon, as an architect and of Micketon architecture, what does disability, inclusive, and equitable housing mean to you in your work?
Thanks, Ali. Great to be here with everybody today. So our firm is in Berkeley. I've been a wheelchair rider all my life. I use hearing aids. So I have a lot of lived experience that I bring to everything that we design. Interestingly, I finished grad school just as the ADA was being created. So my career has sort of paralleled that big change in the built environment, the before and the after. And now 30 years later, I see that the after is really not nearly good enough. We've done probably half and half of our work as affordable housing, and then work for individuals for their homes. And with my own lived experience and that, I have seen that if you are using the ADA and applying it to individual people, that it somehow never has worked out. People always need something different, something else, something bigger, something smaller. And so, you know, we all need to understand and realize that if we just go by the code and meet the minimum dimensions, that we're not doing what people actually need. So we need to think about also cross disabilities, a wider range of needs beyond just mobility, which is where most architects' minds go, and most people really, and think about equitable services, as well as the equitable spaces that we're making. And that if we can do both of those, we're actually going to create the community in our affordable housing projects that we're all trying to get.
Thanks so much, Eric. Again, if any of you, we will have a Q&A at the end of each panel. If you have any questions that come to mind now, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to as many of them as we can. So all of you come with such dynamic perspectives, and I want to hear a little bit about what are the greatest misconceptions about people with disabilities that you see in your work, and how the greatest misconceptions and how that impacts the design, development, or even organizing for inclusive and equitable housing. And one or two of you, if you want to speak to the greatest misconceptions. Don't all jump in one. Do you want me to call on you? Dolores, you want to go first?
Yeah. You know, I think one of the, and also with like acknowledging what Eric was saying, is that people have different needs with what they need with housing. I think a misconception within the industry in general that applies to disability as well is that we don't have the resources, the knowledge, or the capacity to meet those needs. I think that is not true, that we, that not only people with disabilities, but also people in the affordable housing industry are very resourceful, can do a lot with a little. So that's a huge opportunity to like build bridges and do collaborative work and create communities that are integrated and inclusive and accessible. And so even something as minimal as a perception that providing even deeper supports for some people with disabilities who may need it might be an overextension of what this industry is capable of. I think that that's not true, because, you know, most affordable housing buildings already have resident services coordinators. So what would it look like for those resident services coordinators to also, you know, some of those safe services could apply to people with disabilities. Yeah. And providing, also just to name that, like providing those services, providing that extra support means that we have dynamic individuals with disabilities contributing to our communities. So the payoff is just it's just great.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you. Yeah, and I think like even just starting off, you know, I was saying like disability is not a monolith. We are incredibly diverse, and yet all people with disabilities are impacted by ableism. And so if we don't, right, if we like, I think a great misconception is we all have the same needs, and that's not true. And yet, but we have to still look at the role ableism plays in housing, along with racism and other forms of oppression, in order to really create the housing for everyone. And I wanna see if anyone else has any thing to add about some of the greatest misconceptions or stereotypes we need to just break for everyone right now.
Well, I can jump in with one other thing, which is that, well, I wanted to agree with what Dolores said, where there are resident service coordinators and so forth. And when I'm talking to people in the hospitality industry, hotels and Marriott and so forth, one of the things that kind of opens their minds is the idea that when I say, you want to make everybody feel welcome, right? And of course, that's what their job is all about. And so we have people in our affordable housing communities who have that same goal. And so expanding that goal just slightly to think more broadly about people with disabilities at the same time as the rest of the residents can make a much more cohesive community. And the other thing I was going to throw out is that there's this fear of the cost. People always think, oh, well, you know, if I do more accessible housing, it's going to cost so much. And there are a lot of items of accessibility that are just a matter of flexibility and design and smart design that have little or absolutely no cost. But there's also the reality that there are a lot of elements that do have a cost. And so I always try to sort of backpedal and not talk about that too much, but we actually need to put that front and center and realize that we've been actually getting off easy for years. And that doesn't mean that that should be the status quo now. Um, I think of like the parallel of our use of plastics, right? They've given us this inexpensive convenience for all of these years. Now we see that it's sort of this false economy in a way, and it's actually destructive to the world that we want. And it's the same with creating equitable housing. And now we have to pay the true amount that it takes and actually make the world that we want.
I have something to add.
Yeah, go for it, Elizabeth.
I think one of the big misconceptions when it comes to people with disabilities and around housing or programs is that, oh, they'll just be grateful to have a roof over their head. So it doesn't matter where we put these people, but that's not true. We need real choice where we want to live and what that looks like. Don't throw me in a place just because it's a room and you think I'm gonna be happy living there, because that's not true. Disabled people need real choice like everyone else. Like I was telling you the other night, Allie, one size does not fit all. Just because one housing model might work for one person doesn't mean it's gonna work for another one. So real inclusiveness is bringing everyone to the table.
Thanks, Liz, for sure. This is Allie again. As we deepen our understanding of the issues impacting people with disabilities, in your work and experiences, how do you see both racism and ableism intersecting and impacting California's housing crisis and those most impacted? Dolores or Liz, do you want to go ahead first?
Okay, I'll go.
Yeah.
Go for it, Liz.
I think a lot of people of color are not as how they feel in meetings a lot, or what in the representation of is this gonna work for you, or because there's always non people of color at those meetings, and it's like, I don't know if people are afraid or people don't realize that people of color and who are disabled have a lot to bring. We have knowledge as well, but it's just like this disconnect between us and them. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be all of us, no matter what your status. That's how you're gonna build inclusive housing.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Dolores, were you gonna add?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we have to name, right, is to cite Kimberly Crenshaw, is that race and disability intersect and overlap, and that racism and ableism are, they're two very similar things. The root of racism is ableism, and that is to say that the structures of racism in this country are based on the conceptions that certain bodies based off of race are like, racism is based off of like production and capitalism in a lot of ways, right? So what can a body produce? What meaning does a body have based off of race? And so ableism is the same, is a lot of the same thing, is based off of capitalism. When we talk about disability, we think about there's the devaluing of bodies based off whether they can or can't produce for capitalism, right? So in that sense, ableism and racism are the same, are tackling this, are the same kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Yes, they're naming the same thing, but different aspects of people's identities. So when we talk about intersectionality, we're talking about the overlapping of that, the compounding of that, of being a person of color and also being a person with a disability. So I know that when we are talking about that impacted with housing, so when we're looking for, when someone is looking for housing, they are someone with a disability and are someone who is a person of color, they're going to have both of those both of those things come with systemic oppression, and so that's going to be a barrier for how they find housing. And so we can't separate either of them, because we have to recognize people as their true selves as they're coming into. We can't separate parts of our identities when we're trying to navigate different systems. And so as an industry, we have to think about, you know, this industry, especially now post-COVID, and also as the movement for Black Lives is getting even more visibility, and more people are investing in the movement for Black Lives, especially in the housing industry. We have to think about how, what our perceptions around disability are, how we're serving folks with disabilities, because when we're serving folks with disabilities, it also means we're going to be serving folks who are people of color, because people of color also have disabilities, right? Anyone can be impacted by disability or live with a disability. So what are we doing as an industry to break down barriers for people to access housing? And then the other thing that I want to name is that, yes, to coattail off of what Elizabeth was saying, is who are we bringing into our spaces? You know, at EBHO, we have it's a lot of, the majority of our staff right now is people of color, so that's like really exciting. What are other organizations doing? What does our membership look like? How are we weighing the voices of people with various different experiences? Disability justice, the framework of disability justice teaches us that not only do we have to be capitalist in a lot of ways, in the ways that we approach justice, but we also have to center the most impacted. So that is people with the lived experience of being disabled, being people of color. So if, you know, I've been hearing a lot over the past couple years that I've been working with a housing organization and becoming more invested in the housing rights movement, this phrase of housing justice. And I think that the housing industry, the affordable housing industry, is prematurely using that phrase, because we are not yet, I do not believe, in my own very new to this world perception, I do not believe that we as an industry are yet embodying or holding justice practices. I do think we are getting there. I do think that this year is pushing a lot of us even further, which is great. But when we look and think about justice, it looks and moves a certain way. So we have to, I think the challenge for me and for us is to step back from using this term of housing justice and really examine what that means for us, and how are we going to start actually really embodying it. And that looks like centering people who are people of color, centering people who are disabled, centering people who are houseless, centering people who are at the margins.
Thanks, Dolores. So much, we're touching on so much, y'all, and I just want to say this session is hopefully an invitation to dive even deeper. So I want to move to a phrase that's used a lot in the disability rights movement, but impacts housing directly, which is institutional bias. And institutional bias is both a direct correlation to the funding mechanisms of Medicaid that basically tells states that that for the Medicaid dollars, they must go to long-term services and supports to people with disabilities in nursing home and congregate settings, but often community-based services, home and community-based services, are optional. The disability rights movement for a long time has been working to end institutional bias, but this concept of institutional bias also reflects the realities of ableism and the assumption that one of the symptoms of ableism is the belief that people with disabilities who have higher support needs do not have the ability to live in the community, which we know is not true. Not only is it not true, but it is the rights of people with disabilities to live in the most integrated settings, centering choice. But that isn't really reflected in a lot of policy and practices to this day. So what can leaders, developers, and policymakers do to counter institutional bias in housing development?
Can I start?
Please.
Okay. First of all, policymakers and leaders and our governments need to get rid of these nice little bias conceptions that people with disability needs all this. They use the language so sweet and so nice. You can wrap it up into a nice little bowl. But it's like, I don't know how many of you knew Jerry Lewis back in the day when he had a telethon. He really thought he was doing a good thing by saying, oh, we need to help these poor individuals with disabilities, they can't really do anything. But it's like we're so much more than our disabilities. You just need to build affordable, accessible housing without trying to make it so very rigid and put a label on it. I realize that's how most agencies get their funding, but it's like, it's so demeaning to me and other people with disabilities. Like, you're trying to say, we need to live in a special part. We can't live in everyday society, which we all know is a BS.
Yeah, it is BS, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm just being cognizant of time. I want to just make sure tangible, like any other thoughts on how housing developers can counter this institutional bias in their developing or in their policy work?
They just need to build it and stop acting like there's a great hope that they're doing a justice for us. That we're special cases.
I think the tangible thing is to listen to what it is that folks with disabilities need and what they're naming. And I actually think a good example of this, although it's not explicitly named, is Housing California's Residents United network. A lot of the residents are seniors and are people who are houseless or previously houseless. And I imagine, because of the statistics, that some of them are disabled, even if they may not necessarily hold that identity or recognize it yet. So there's a couple different things. There's one thing is like naming our on an individual basis, right? Maybe not necessarily like outing yourself, but like naming and holding that perspective that you are someone with lived experience as a person with a disability. That is important when you're in these spaces that are creating policy. And then the second thing is when there are those folks who are coming into the space and upholding their disability identity, is honoring that and listening to them. And one of the ways that RUN in particular does that is through the process that we do called there ought to be a law. I say we because EPO is in partnership with RUN and organizes our resident members to participate in the RUN program. So there ought to be a law process happens every year, and it's literally it happens at the regional convenings, and literally folks are talking about, like, if I could create a law that would solve this issue, here's what the law would be. And from that, Housing California listens to what they say and creates the actual language and policy, right? So some folks who maybe don't have the educational background to write the policy and also don't have the access to the spaces where policymakers are able to impact what policy is being created. And then Housing California pushes it. And as statewide, as a coalition, all of the partners and the people engaged in RUN push it every single year. So so that's like one prime example. So maybe people on here should engage in RUN, is what I'm saying.
I love the RUN shout out.
Yeah. And I think I'll just give an example of something that happened that I always cite, which was a couple years ago in 2017, I believe it was 2017, residents at a regional convening were like, sometimes in the summer I go and visit a family member who's in another state, and I leave a check with another family member to turn in so that I can pay my rent on time. And then there's also people who are not in affordable housing, who are part of rent, who also are like, yeah, sometimes my church may pay for my rent if I'm short on rent, but the landlord won't accept a check from that person because, you know, it could establish a third party's residence in that housing, and that's like really tricky for them. And so there's all these like barriers around getting someone being able to give a third party check to pay rent. So that was a huge issue from the resident perspective. And then it also was an issue for the landlord because there was some legal implications. So Ren was able to develop this bill on like, hey, you can accept a third party check. It doesn't establish another person's residency in that building, but let's protect everyone here and make it work better for everyone. And so that's like a prime example of how the REN program listened to people. And also because, and I'm speaking to that specifically because I imagine there are folks with disability, a lot of folks with disabilities rely, but not everyone, rely on on SSDI or other social services programs for income. And so those services are not abundant. They may not be able to meet rent. Maybe they have other support systems. So that impacts everybody, right? Yeah.
Love it. I love those
Okay.
tangible examples. Thank you so much, Dolores.
Okay.
So I'm going to keep us moving. We started a little late, so we're going to maybe shorten our breakouts just a bit, but we still are going to do the breakouts. So I want to move to continuing to think about what considerations developers and folks in the affordable housing movement and field can take. So Eric, what are some design considerations for affordable and accessible housing that you believe are critical to advancing the field?
Yeah, well, two things that I'm always talking about with people are creative thinking and starting early. So in terms of creative thinking, it's actually pretty simple that architects need to actually understand the rationale behind the requirements of the ADA or the California Building Code, not just what the numbers are. You know, why are they there? What's the function that they're providing for people? How do people use that 18 inches of strike side clearance? They need to apply those rationales, once they understand them, to the designs they're working on and stop just using the code numbers, so that they're really thinking and being creative about the places that they're making. And that's a very simple thing, but it takes a tremendous amount of education to let developers and architects understand why they're doing what they're doing. And once they do understand that, I have found that a light bulb goes off, a constellation of light bulbs goes off, and people are more than willing to think more deeply and be creative. And the second thing I was saying is starting early. So I make the parallel to the LEED green building process, where if you're doing a LEED building, you start with day one conference with the entire design team, and you bring in a green building consultant. They're at the table, they're participating, they're helping to guide the process. The same thing needs to be done with the universal design consultant. So somebody who has that insight can help to teach the team, the developer and the architect both, what are the opportunities that can be taken before pen touches paper and before CAD drawings start being developed. And the reason that it needs to be done early is that by the time, for example, if I'm brought into a project, even in schematic design, it's already decided what the number of units is, what the street frontage is, and so how many units fit. So what's the maximum unit dimension? How many parking spaces are there? A pro forma has determined what the density bonus calculation is. Everything is really set. So like I was saying earlier with the cost realization, it may be that things need to be shifted and maybe a unit gets lost, maybe two, maybe units change in shape, number of bedrooms change. So architects often feel like they're being terribly clever by, and emphasis on terrible, with shoehorning in sort of these perfect dimensions. It's like, they've created this machine for living, and they're very proud of it. But as soon as you get into construction documents, you have plumbing stacks that need another 2 inches here or there, or maybe in every unit. Structural elements wind up being another 6 inches wide, and those perfect dimensions aren't working anymore. So if we have elbow room and thinking ahead, then we have space for construction tolerances that might come up, but we also have the opportunity to actually create those spaces that are going to work for more people. So it's a double benefit, and I think people don't necessarily understand that until they've been through the process.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks. And I'm just gonna ask one more question, and I'm gonna ask you, Sid, to start us off. And then what'll happen is I've gotten a few questions in the chat. If you have a question, we'll probably have time for 1 or 2 questions, and then we will do short breakouts. Sid, what are examples that you have seen or been a part of, especially around housing and homelessness, where you've seen people with and without disabilities co-create, whether that be policy or organize for change together?
Thanks, Allie. So I was thinking a little bit about this question, obviously, and I haven't had the opportunity to do so, and I think I'd really like to highlight in this context the Project Room Key and the Project Home Key programs coming from the state, implemented at the local level. I think it would be a little premature to say that these programs are a success, but Project Room Key is essentially providing hotels and motels on a transitional, hotel and motel rooms on a transitional basis for people who are either COVID-19 plus or COVID vulnerable, that have a number of other co-occurring conditions. And then Project Home Key is essentially supposed to make the acquisition, the permanent acquisition of these spaces available for permanent housing. And I think, in terms of affordable housing, I think that this program really gives us maybe a different way to look at what development actually means. And in terms of efficient, affordable, accessible housing development, if we can take a survey of the spaces and places out there that already exist, that may be able to be acquired, and then run through how to rehab these spaces and make them, physically accessible. This program really seems like a potentially viable solution for the future of affordable housing development in California.
And I would say that one of the next steps that everyone is invited to is what many of you participate in, which is the California Disability Inclusive Housing Working Group. And what can it look like when these initiatives like Project Room Key and Home Key are implemented? How can, because so many of the people who will be living there will be people with co-occurring conditions, which are most likely or all disabilities, protected under law by movements for people with disability rights. How do we come together as disability rights and affordable housing to ensure that those projects can be the most effective and inclusive as possible to meet the needs of those most impacted, and that means that people with and without disabilities need to be co-creating these solutions together. And I want to bring up one question that has come through the audience, and I'm going to pull it up now. Bear with me. So from Suzanne Hemphill, apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. I've heard a variety of opinions on issues regarding integration versus services targeted to serve special needs populations. I'd love to hear perspectives from the panelists on ways to support and manage integration.
I didn't hear all the question.
Okay, let me read it one more time. I've heard a variety of opinions on issues regarding integration versus services targeted to serve special needs populations. I'd love to hear your perspectives from the panelists on ways to support and manage integration.
I have a really quick note on that, which is that if we're building housing that anyone can use, where there's any unit works for anybody with any need, then that integration is going to be made that much more easy. So it provides us a path for that to happen rather than needing to build, a special 3-unit house on the peninsula for people getting out of the Agnew Center or something like that, where they're somewhat integrated community-wise, but not integrated in their, or neighborhood-wise, but not integrated in a living community. So if we have multifamily larger buildings that really are open to all, then that opportunity will present itself.
I have a quick
Yeah, Elizabeth, go for it, please.
comment also. Those of us who live in the Bay Area and know the Vouchers campus, that's a place that's very inclusive and has a lot of different services. So if, like he was just saying, if you build an apartment building with a lot of different people, you can also have a lot of different functionalities within that apartment building that will foster everybody's needs. So that's how you bring people together of all walks of life.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
I think to add to that, I don't think it has to be a either or, integration or services. I think it's where it's appropriate. It needs to be both. I also think that we have being able to center people's choice and having a menu of options for people, as Elizabeth mentioned a little bit earlier, when we're talking about housing is important. There's the Olmsted Decision, which was a legal decision in 1990 that says that government organizations have and communities have a legal responsibility to make sure that people with disabilities can be fully integrated into communities applies here, which is that we have some like legal standing on being able on our rights to be able to be in communities, integrated into communities, but we just have to I guess advocate for that to happen on all levels. And I think part of the way of managing that is by giving people the choice, giving people the option. And, you know, some people need less services, some people need more services. And I think it's kind of just like a balancing act, and having, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Thanks, Dolores. So with that, y'all, I want to close with the final question, and then we'll do breakout groups. And then with that, I also want to remind everyone, if you need captioning, please let the tech and accessibility support know in the chat so that you can stay in the main room where the captioning will be. So my question for all of you as we close is, what is one call to action for today's audience that can advance more disability inclusive and equitable housing in California? And does anyone want to start us off with your one call to action?
I can do that.
Go for it.
So I like to encourage people to round up for access, is the phrase I use. So it's really taking responsibility for making the change in accessibility yourselves. So make 3 required accessible parking spaces into 4 instead, or make the unisex restroom, you know, large enough for a large reclining wheelchair and an attendant. Make the accessible portion of your lobby desk in the front rather than at the back or around the corner. Things like this, an automatic door operator at the front door that might not be required by code. So do lots of little things, and you can start that tomorrow. It's very easy to do that, and then those will aggregate and become bigger things and add up. And all of those really cost pennies in the scope of a multifamily project, and can make a profound difference in people's lives, actually for years into the future, because our buildings are around for many decades. And anything that we do now, just like with sustainability, has a tremendous impact down the road.
I love you, Eric. I just want to say, what we could do now is start having a real conversation with people around accessibility. Don't wait till tomorrow. Do it today. Really get out there, and don't be afraid to come up to people with disabilities and ask them, what do you need to make your place livable? What is it that you want to be in a building where you feel inclusive, and really let people know what it is that makes you you. And I love Ed Roberts because once the ramp is really hella cool. I love riding my chair up and down and going into the restrooms is so easy because they have the buttons right there. Yeah. You don't have to wait for a non-disabled person to open the door.
Absolutely.
It's just little things like that.
Yeah.
It's so meaningful.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Sid, you want to go ahead with your one call to action?
Yeah, well, I think actually right now in California, there's the political will to advocate for housing for all. I think the pandemic has helped push that political will forward, especially in terms of people living outside right now. And I want to say that, you know, whether it's a wealth tax that helps implement something like this, or whether the feds actually revitalize public housing for all, I think that now is the time to start saying, how do we make this happen? It's really, really important.
Thanks, Sid. Dolores?
My call to action, I think, is on an individual level, for everyone to examine their own the ways in which we are holding ableism or ableist perceptions. So learn about ableism and learn about how to tackle it and undo the ways that you may be ableist in your own life. And
Thanks.
one great resource for that, I think, would be Sins Invalid. So it's,
Yes.
And we can put that in the chat. And also we'll be putting in an opportunity to sign up for our California Disability Inclusive Housing Working Group. And you can always connect with me, and I love sharing all the resources, following disabled leaders, people with disabilities like all of you today, such deep wisdom. And with that, for the final bit of today, there may be some time to also get y'all to come back and answer any other questions. But I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing today. And with that, we're going to do some reflecting on what we've just heard from our colleagues. And can you all see the head, heart, and wheels? Okay, so on the screen we have a woman of color having her hand on her chin, and below it says head. What are you thinking about right now? Next, there's an image of a heart and the word heart, and then it says, what are you feeling? And then there's a man of color using a wheelchair. He's doing a wheelie, and it says wheels. What are you going to do next? What are you going to move towards? So this is the prompt for the breakout rooms: head, heart, and wheels. What has been shared today are you thinking about? What questions do you have? What are you feeling? And what are you going to do next? So we are going to give you 10 minutes to connect in your breakout. And then we will come back and listen to how some folks have practiced these ideas in some developments and communities around the state. So enjoy your breakouts, and we'll see you very soon.
And as we open the breakouts, if you are not prompted to join a breakout, that means that you'll stay here in the main room where there will be captioning. And if you shuffle really quickly because people have left before breakouts and your breakout room ends up with just one person, don't worry. We will move you into a breakout room with another person right away. So we will open all rooms.
Thanks, Michaela.
Ali, just as a heads up, to pause the recording for people staying in the main breakout room so it doesn't get archived. Yeah, and people can share open.
To have the conversation move forward.
So you trust Chase Bank?
Thank you all so much. Welcome back. This is Ali again. I just we're gonna move right into putting ideas into practice. I hope that you enjoyed your small groups, and it was just a taste of some of the actions that you can take on next. If you are not speaking now, I will please ask you to turn off your mic and your camera. And we're gonna first hear from actually projects on the ground. We're practicing inclusion and equity, centering people with disabilities. So this is just gonna be a quick spotlight of 3 organizations. The first, we have Jan Stokely, Executive Director of Housing Choices. And I'm gonna share my screen now. And Jan, take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. A quick profile of Housing Choices, who we are and what we do. We're a nonprofit organization working in Silicon Valley and the Monterey Bay area to partner with affordable housing developers to create inclusive housing for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in particular. And next slide. The slides are, yeah. So our focus is really from the ground up. We are a housing service provider, so we provide housing navigation services to people with developmental disabilities who want to live independently, who want to get their own apartment. And from that work, we build a community of self-advocates who help us advocate for inclusion at the local level. Next slide. So we have, over the years, partnered with a variety of affordable housing developers. We currently have 18 properties that we call partner properties, where some of the apartments are subject to a preference for people with developmental disabilities who are served by the regional center. And those properties are of every size and type, and our developers include the leading developers in the Bay Area: First Community Housing, Charities Housing, Eden Housing, Midpen Housing, For the Future Housing, Related California, the Housing Authority, and market rate developers. So a real variety of developers and a real variety of project types. Next slide. So as I said, we are first and foremost a service provider. So we're working with about 2,000 people annually here in our geographic area who are looking for affordable housing, and we're helping them navigate that system, and it is extremely difficult to navigate. And from those people, we support self-advocacy and advocate for affordable housing at the local level. When we secure a partner property and inclusive housing commitment, then we provide housing-based services to help the residents with developmental disabilities. It's a level of service at the housing community that's above and beyond each individual person's independent living or supported living or individualized services. So it's really a staffing capacity at the property that is eyes and ears on the ground, working with the property manager to foster housing stability and also to foster inclusion. Next slide. We have 18 partner properties in some of the highest cost communities in California. They go back to the year 2000. Our first property was on land that was part of the Agnews Developmental Center. It's a 450 unit market rate project where 23 of the apartments, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, are subject to a preference for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Since then, we've partnered with a whole variety of developers using every kind of housing finance program available. But overwhelmingly, our success comes from advocating at the local level for city councils to address this particular housing issue in their own community. The number one thing we hear from people and their families is that they want to have inclusive housing in the community where they grew up and have friends and family and support systems. So we're really working very much at the local level to create this. We also are very involved at the state level. You'll see this middle photo is Housing Choices, a group of residents. We go to the Run day at the Capitol every year, and we introduce our housing needs to the larger affordable housing agenda that's supported by RUN, which is the Residents United Network. So we're advocating for affordable housing, and we're also educating people about just how easy it is to make affordable housing inclusive of people of all incomes and all abilities.
Thank you so much, Jan, for that spotlight on housing choices. And I just want to give a reminder, we will have Q&A after all of these awesome spotlights of different organizations. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. Next, we have Rochelle Mills, President and CEO of Innovative Housing. Take it away.
Yeah, this is a project that we're working on in Santa Ana. The reason why I'm showing this slide is to show the feel that we want to create with the housing that we create. A really vibrant community of people of all different ages, backgrounds, ability levels, income levels, etc. And so this is an early rendering of a project that we hope to break ground sometime next year. Go to the next one. Next slide, okay. It starts with housing is our tagline, and it reflects our belief that equitable, catalytic, and economically vibrant communities are anchored by high quality housing. That's important to us because a lot of times, I think Elizabeth said it best, when you're doing affordable housing or housing for people with special needs or disabilities, people tend to believe that what you do is you just build it and people ought to be grateful. But what we want is high quality housing that is catalytic, meaning once we put it there, it will likely set the tone for the community around it. And so we want it to be beautiful, we want it to be accessible, we want it to be vibrant, and we want it to set the tone so that others will reach the bar that we're setting. Go to the next slide. I wanted to tell you a sense of how we start to identify a project. When we look for a community, or when we consider where we're going to be, we look for community assets. You know, every community has something that is, well, I shouldn't say all communities do, but most communities have something that, you know, these assets that you can share with your residents. We look for opportunities for inclusion and diversity. We look for the resources that are in those neighborhoods. So what we're showing here is that we start out with, you know, what's going on in a quarter of a mile. So what can our residents walk to? What's going on in a half a mile? What's going on a mile from there? What we liked about this particular site was within walking distance or a short drive. And in Orange County, where it's difficult to find public transit, this site actually has 3 bus stops. But within a mile, we've got grocery stores, we've got 3 different parks, we've got lots of different shops, we've got churches, the kinds of things that if somebody didn't have a car or had limited mobility or access, that they could feel comfortable in this community. What we also found, and that was wonderful for us, was within 3/4 of a mile is a regional center. And we have a partnership with the Orange County Regional Center as their housing advocate. And we thought that, well, then this will be a perfect site for us to co-locate and integrate consumers from the regional center. What we look at in all of our site is what is the likelihood that we can carve out 25% of our units for special needs. Now that doesn't mean only those 25 units, but where we can take 25% of the units and set them aside so that only those specific tenants can move in. So out of this project that we're looking at, 160 units total, that means 40 that we can set aside. And we will consider everyone in that group that comes under the umbrella of special needs. Veterans, seniors, formerly homeless, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, any group and we see, can we finance that project to cover those as a set aside? Now, once you hit those 40, then they could also apply in the general population for those other 20 units, but we want to make sure that we designate a specific portion, and our target is usually about 20 to 25%. Go to the next slide. And then we map out the paths, the access through the site. I think Elizabeth said it best. You want a seamless way to travel through your properties. You don't want to have to go out one door and then go around the side of the building. We want all people, everyone, to feel that this is their home. And so we map out access paths throughout the site. We look for areas for natural engagement or forced engagement. You know, people tend to like to be in their own space, but how do we get them through the site where they have these natural collisions, where they have to engage and meet with their neighbors? And how are we connecting to daily activities? When I say we have a mixed property, we're not only mixing the resident population, we're also looking at mixing the uses. So do we have the ability to have a cafe on site? Do we have the ability to have some things like package storage areas? You know, what kinds of things do we have, and how do we connect them to those daily activities? The drive in and drive out for van service or lift service, or ways for people to, you know, just have a seamless daily activity. You can go to the next slide. And then the final thing that we want to do, and we do exactly what Eric said, we bring people in at the beginning of the conversation, while it's still on paper, before we've made a commitment and locked in the number of units or determined where the units are going. We try to distribute them equally around the site so that you don't have a portion of the building where that's where the homeless folks are, or that's where the mentally ill people are. We want them equally distributed, so this really is just an integrated community. But in terms of looking at a plan, we try to look at flexibility, because, you know, your mobility, if you've got sensory challenges, if you've got the condition of someone living and having a caregiver in there, or you've got a couple families that are moved in together, how do we give the most flexibility, the most opportunity for someone to move in and make it their home and to feel comfortable? We want to have beautiful places so that people will say, that's where I want to live. You know, so that these are places that everybody can feel proud of and excited to be a part of, no matter their income level or educational level or abilities, etc. And the last slide is simply, if you want to get in touch with me and ask anything, feel free to do so.
Thanks so much, Rochelle.
Thank you.
Last but not least, we have Caroline Bosch, the COO of the Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Allie. As Allie mentioned, I'm a colleague of hers at the Kelsey, so hopefully we could tell you a little bit about our two projects. In addition to the advocacy work that Allie leads, we also have two on-the-ground projects under development right now. So the first one is in San Jose, 115 units. Similar to both Rochelle's and Jan's projects, 25% reserved for particularly for regional center clients, so folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but we're really looking at cross disabilities for the entire building and our approach in general. And so we are working with Eric Micketon, who is our universal design consultant on this project, and thinking about all those things that both Rochelle and Jan talked about in terms of creating a sense of belonging for all residents. And part of how we're doing funding, because there isn't an explicit operating subsidy for this, for people with disabilities, for the population. And so both of our projects are mixed income. And so one of the goals that we have is creating a project that is a great experience. It is the best place to live for both all of our residents who will be at 20% AMI, so at extremely low income, so reliant on SSI, as well as our moderate income tenants. So we'll have up to 80% AMI in both our San Jose project, which is 115 units, and then also in our San Francisco project, which is looking about 120 units right now. Both of them, just to start with San Jose, that's a little bit more in a neighborhood setting. So we've thought about things like an accessible drop-off area to help ease traffic in the neighborhood. It is transit oriented, so it is right on the light rail line in San Jose, and it is. And we are including amenities like a sensory garden, so something for folks with more sensory disorders to help to have light touch feel in a calming place on the side of the garden, on the side of the building. For our Civic Center site, this is an exciting site. It's directly across the street from our City Hall in San Francisco. We won this site through a C40 competition around resilient cities. It is owned by the City of San Francisco. The lot is, so it's right across the street from City Hall, and this will be a really, really exciting project that demonstrates both inclusive housing, sustainability, and how to and affordability as well. And the other thing it's just such a beacon of it's right next to where the 504 sit-ins were. However many years ago it was, and so we're really excited to have this in such a monumental historic location. This again will be 100% universally designed, thinking about right now everything that Rochelle was talking about in terms of how do people enter, how do people live, how do people connect with each other, how do we create a really sense of belonging between all of our residents. And so those are things that we're working on right now. San Jose has been entitled, and we're in the financing right now, and we're applying for entitlements for Civic Center later this year. These are our first two homes, buildings that we're building. We're really thinking about homes for more. And we talk about homes for more. These are homes that are good for everyone, not just people with disabilities, but all things that benefit all humans. We think about more affordability. So this is similar to what I said, since there is no operating subsidy, how do we bring 20% EMI units to market, because they're so badly needed, as Ali said in her introduction, that there is just there's no place that people could live reliant on SSI. And so we're doing this by having income averaging, so bringing both 20s, 60s, 50s, and 80s for our projects. We think about more inclusion. And so this culture of interconnectivity and community will be very important. This will be done through a role that will be staffing in the building that's called our Inclusion Concierge. The Inclusion Concierge help residents connect to each other and the greater community. They'll also be part of the service coordinators that we've heard, I believe we heard in the very beginning, and the resident service coordinators are a role that exists in a lot of different places. Now, how do we make that role even better and make sure that those folks are, in addition to helping the folks that need it with service coordination, helping those people connect with both formal and informal support networks that would be available within our community. And also more accessible. I think that's been the theme of today. So as we noted, universal design, and then as we noted before about kind of, the options and giving people the choice. I think Elizabeth noted at the beginning, and so we're calling it service-ready housing, and that it's with the Inclusion Concierge and the service coordinator, then we can help people connect to and have more agency around the services that they use. So separating out housing and services, which is really important for just being community-based settings, to being aligned with community-based settings, that folks that need services have the agency to be able to choose between what services they use and what housing they have. Some of the other things that we think about is really the intersectionality around homelessness and disabilities. So we're working with our local partners to find to make sure that we can tap into those populations that we talked into before, to design something that is welcoming for people who have been experiencing homelessness and also people who have disabilities. And as we've heard, there's just a big overlap of that of those populations, and just to kind of close it out is a lot of the design that we've been doing, and as we noticed, Eric, a part of it has been around really making sure that we're disability centered and having people who have disabilities to be a part of our design and thinking about how we designing this building. That's really important to just creating the community that works for all. I think we heard Elizabeth say at the very beginning part of the session, like just ask us what we need, what works, and what we heard Eric Mickerton say in terms of it's not just code, it's about how people live. It's how people use the code is important, and so that's something that we take very importantly and have been integrating into our design. We're working with Sarah Regis on our first one and Mercy Housing on our second. I wanted to note that because I think we have our friends from Mercy on the line with us today.
Thank you so much to all of you for sharing examples of putting these practices of inclusion and equity into action. So with that, we're almost done with our learning lab, and I want to take a few minutes now for some questions. So first, and I want to, of course, hear directly from first the Caroline, Rochelle, and Jan, but feel free, other panelists, if you have any wisdom to share, definitely do so. I do want to add that, and the Kelsey does model this, as I know because I work there, but not just to have people with disabilities at the table, but to pay us and to hire us. And I think it's really, and to do that with any marginalized community, right, that we should always be centering and partnering with. So with that, I want to ask a question we've gotten in the chat. What is the biggest industry and or policy change that you'd like to see to make inclusive, affordable, accessible housing more possible?
This is Rochelle Mills. What I'd like to see is for those policymakers not to be so myopic. We tend to be reactive. And so if the outcry is currently homelessness, it is homelessness to the exclusion of everything else. When I first got here 12 years ago, it was senior housing to the exclusion of everything else. Then it was veterans housing to the exclusion. And so when we had senior projects, we had to figure out how to make them senior veteran projects. And now we have to figure out how to take our veteran project and make them homeless veteran projects. I'd like to see them solve for the issue without crippling the ability to make the projects diverse and reflective of the kinds of communities we'd all like to live in.
Thank you.
I'll chime in with that, seconding that, and also saying I think we need a state housing finance program like the former MHP supportive housing program that enabled developers to target rents to be affordable to people at 15 or 20% of AMI. We see those programs being made available for people who are already homeless. But for our community, we have this huge bubble of people in their 30s and 40s who are living at home with parents in their 60s and 70s. And they're not homeless yet. And we don't want them to become homeless. So we need a state housing finance program that really incentivizes developers to partner with us at the local level. And I would also add that I think at the federal level, there's some real regulatory barriers to using project-based vouchers for a specific type of disability. Of course, developmental disabilities, it covers this huge range of abilities and differences. It's not one thing. But there is some lack of clarity in the federal regulations regarding project-based vouchers. And it would be really helpful to get that cleared up, because with project-based vouchers, then the people that we're supporting to live in inclusive housing would have a manageable rent burden.
Thank you. And we have another question coming in, which is, I'd love to hear more about any specific state regulations, rules, or programs that might be unintentionally constraining housing choice for people with disabilities. And I know we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to see if anyone had any thoughts to share on that question.
At the state level, I don't think so much. I think it's more at maybe federal levels in terms of the need to. Maybe I should back up. Sometimes there's the need to fund services and housing together, and I feel like that could be limiting choice by connecting those two things, especially for the populations that we're serving.
I think at the level of the tax credit housing finance program, the targeting to extremely low income levels, it has the effect of unintentionally excluding people with developmental disabilities who tend to be well below that level. So I think there is an exclusionary impact in the way some of the housing finance programs are targeted to define the lowest level of affordability as 30% of AMI. And so that comes back to, we need a very robust state housing finance program that enables developers to target people who are not yet homeless, but who are in the 15 to 20% of AMI income level.
I have to agree with Jan. What we want is not to wait for people to fall off the cliff, but to try to catch them. And I think that right now, legislators very narrowly define who gets those project-based vouchers, and that's how you help those who are below 30%. And so if we can, through advocacy, help to have, in addition to those that they've already set aside, but those who, additional vouchers, because, and I know you know this, Allie, through the Lanterman Association, a lot of people don't, Housing Alliance, I should say, a lot of people don't see people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities as being traditionally considered special needs or eligible for those funds. And so you're causing people to have to fall off the cliff in order to be eligible.
Sorry, Rochelle, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I cut you off a little bit. We're just at 2 minutes. Did you want to finish your last sentence? You went on mute.
No, I was just saying that's not the goal that we're going for. So I'm good.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I think a part of the way that we begin to solve for this is actually what we've done today during this learning lab, and also to have partners like Housing California really step up in their allyship. I really want to just appreciate Housing California as supporting the Raise the Roof program, which is a training program for leaders with disabilities to advance housing, and also for supporting increased accessibility at the conference this year. it is really, not only is it important for people with disabilities to come together and talk about the issues that impact our lives, we also have to be a part of the mainstream. And also people with disabilities are already there, but when we don't talk about access, we're actually not honoring their wholeness and not really solving, we're gonna be missing the mark in really ending California's housing crisis and pursuing housing justice. So with that, I want to access of the captioning and the ASL today, and all of our speakers, Caroline, Jan, Rochelle, Dolores, Elizabeth, Eric, Sid, our access support, Michaela, and all of you. And so with that, take care and take action, and please sign up if you're interested on connecting more. Housing California participates, and a number of other partners in the California Disability Inclusive Housing Working Group. You can also email me, ally@thekelsey.org, and we can connect, and I can share with you resources and how you can continue to take action in your anti-ableism and along with your anti-racism work. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks, Charlie.
Eric.
So much.